Beautiful. Awesome. So everybody, thank you all so much for joining us again. So sorry for a little bit later of a start. So excited to have each of you here. Looks like we've got people from all over, Oregon, California, Washington, New Mexico, Virginia. Awesome. So, beautiful. Look at Asheville, North Carolina. Okay, that's pretty close to me. So I am normally based out of Charleston, South Carolina, where I used to be a property manager. I've actually used PriceLabs in my day-to-day. I am actually currently in New Orleans. There was a conference here yesterday that I attended. But today we are talking a little bit about mastering PriceLabs. So talking about best practices for optimizing and maximizing your pricing potential. Now, a little bit of background. This is the second time that we've done this session, so it's a little bit experimental. We might be doing more of these sessions in the future. So if y'all have any feedback at all, please do let us know so we can improve in our future sessions. So the reason we're doing this webinar is because a lot of people have sort of reached out to us and said, I've been using PriceLabs for a month or 2 months or 3 months, and I'm not sure that I'm really confident in what I'm doing. I feel like there's more that I need to do. Now, a lot of the times, sometimes it's actually you should be doing less, or people just, or our users just don't know where to necessarily focus their efforts. So that is where this Mastering Price Labs session came to be. So hopefully today we're gonna go back to basics a little bit, talk about some common problems that we see, talk about some of the questions that you all submitted before when you were signing up for this webinar, and of course, answer your questions as they come in. Do you see one now? I normally have two screens, so I'm only working with one right now. Okay, beautiful. Just telling us where you're from. Lovely. So yeah, so as we're going through, please use the Q&A for questions. That way, if we don't get to answer them today, we can always get back to you. Also just helps us stay a little bit more organized. The chat can get a little bit chaotic. But let's dive on in. Um, Beautiful. So today, like I said, we're going back to basics, right? PriceLabs doesn't need to be complicated. Now, there are a ton of customizations, and sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming, but sometimes making the smallest tweaks to things like your base price and your minimum price can really make all of the difference in your success long term. So we'll start there. We'll look at base prices, we'll look at minimum prices, and then we'll get into minimum stay restrictions. Because if you're not doing that using data, it can also really affect the performance of your listings. We'll finish up by looking at comparing your listings with the market, and then also talk about a couple of other customizations that will give you just a little bit more control and also help you be successful in your business. Again, if you have any questions, please do let us know. That is what I'm here for. Pallav is also here helping answering questions. Um, but yeah, let's dive on in. So first of all, PriceLabs 101. Let's take a step back and say, do we know the basics? If you haven't joined our PriceLabs basic onboarding webinar, I 100% recommend doing that. We run that every single day. I believe it's at, I want to say 2 p.m. Eastern. I can, so Flav, if you could put in the chat the link for our webinars page on our main website, that'd be super helpful. So we run PriceLabs Basic Onboarding every single day, Monday through Friday. If you haven't done that yet, I definitely recommend it because we'll be talking about these things that are a little bit more basic, but we're going to be talking about them in depth. So it's really important that you have a little bit more of a base. So if you haven't done the basic onboarding, definitely do that. But let's do a little checklist here. Have you set up your base price and your minimum price? Did you utilize the dynamic pricing minimum, or sorry, do you utilize dynamic minimum stay settings? Are you up to date on the default customizations and how they benefit you? And do you know how often your prices are syncing? So these are really basic things that we cover in the 101, or it used to be called the 101, now it's called the basic onboarding. This and more. It's live, it's small groups, so you can ask as many questions as you want. It's a really, really great resource that we have. Now we also have we used to call it the 201 webinar, now it's called the Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. Also, a really great session to attend. We go through pretty much all the different customizations that are available, when to use it and when not to use it. And I believe Paul will be putting that in the chat. Beautiful. So let's actually get into the meat of what we're talking about. So first, we want to talk about your base price setup. So what is a base price? The base price is like the foundation of all of your rates, right? So setting your foundation too high or too low is not necessarily going to set you up for success, right? We want it to be fine-tuned for your listing. And we try to give you a little bit of help with the base price help tool, as well as some of the other data products that we have. But let's dive in here. So I'm actually going to hop into my account, and feel free to interrupt me if any questions come up while I'm doing this. Because normally I can see the questions and my screen, and this I'm going a little bit blind here. Awesome. So we're going to hop into one of my listings. Let's say we'll take a look at Charlotte's Web. Beautiful. So let's start here. We're going to say, initially, when you first set your base price, there's this little grayed out number. We're reading all of the rates from your PMS or your connected account when you first connect your listing, and we're making an assumption. So if you put in dummy rates, say I put $1,000 in it, I don't expect to ever rent for that, but I know I'm going to connect PriceLabs. We're going to read that and we're going to assume that that is what you normally rent for. So be careful here. That's probably my first tip. If you see this grayed out or like imported base price, make sure that the prices in your PMS are the ones that you actually want us to sort of base our initial recommendation off of. If they're not, you can go ahead and use this Help Me Choose a Base Price tool. Now, this is super useful because it gives you a little bit of context about your market, right? So once you start syncing for 2 weeks, we'll give you a recommended base price. So if your listing is not performing very well, we might say drop your base price a little bit. If it's doing really well, we'll say raise it. But let's take a look at this market-based price. Now, the first thing that I like to do when I'm fine-tuning my base price is use this little lasso tool. Now, not everybody needs to do this, but it is useful if you're in different markets. So this is Charlotte. It's not a great example of this. Some of the other listings I have in my account are like on an island. Now, even though the landmass very close to the island is really close by physically, it might mean that my listings that are on the island should be priced very differently than those on the mainland, right? So if you're in a situation like that, or maybe you know that this downtown area is much higher end than maybe like an uptown area, or you name it, this is your first chance at like giving our algorithm a little bit of a human touch. You know your market very well, you know your listings very well, and that's what sort of you need to tell us via your base price, if that makes any sense. So first, I'm going to do this little lasso tool. I'm going to say, actually, I only want to take into account this market or this area in this market. Keep in mind, you don't want to narrow this down too much. If you only have 2 or 3 other listings in the area, then we're probably not going to have quite enough data to come up with like an accurate base price. So try to have, 20, 30, ideally like 50 listings in the area, but sometimes that's just not possible. So try to keep it to at least 20, I would say. Now, your next set of sort of informing us about your listing are these areas here, right? So you'll see segment, you'll see bedroom count, and then you'll see this nice little graph telling you what your prices will look like seasonally with the selected base price. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying, okay, let me take a look at my listing. I've got a studio, but maybe it's a big studio. So I also want to consider some of the 1-bedrooms. Or maybe it's studio, but like the kitchen is really small. So I want to also consider some of the rooms in the area. You can do this. Give us just a little bit more information about your listing, and then you'll be able to see how this market-based price is actually changing. Now, I also have the option to change my segment. Now, the way that these are set up is we're not actually looking at, an upscale property versus a mid-scale property. We're not necessarily saying like, hey, we've actually looked at the photos and these listings are nicer than the others. We're doing this based on the average pricing. So if you choose upscale, we're going to put your market-based suggestion at the 75th percentile of the average prices for the listings that you basically selected, whether that's via the lasso tool or also this bedroom selection here. Now, what is a percentile? So let's pretend that there are 100 listings in this market and we line them up by their average price from least expensive to most expensive. If you count all the way to number 75, that's essentially your 75th percentile, is that whatever that person or that listing's price is. So upscale is the 75th percentile, mid-scale is the 50th percentile, and economy is the 25th percentile. So that's where your base price will be. It'll be around that average percentile for your market. Now, what should you choose? Take a minute and actually explore some of the listings in your market. Go ahead and click on some of these dots. It'll actually take you to the Airbnb page. Now, when you're deciding whether you should be mid-scale or upscale or economy, think about the listings around you because you're essentially saying, where should my prices sit relative to my competition? Do I have a pool and an ocean view and all the best amenities, but all of my neighbors, they don't have any of that? That would mean that you should be upscale. If you, or the opposite, right? You know that maybe your home needs a little bit of renovation. Maybe you want to optimize more for occupancy instead of your prices, then I would maybe put your base price on the lower end or choose economy or maybe somewhere between economy and mid-scale. But this is the first step, is sort of understanding where your listing sits relative to those around you. And this is a really good tool to do that. Okay, so good question. So what is the mile radius that you use? For instance, this example is in Charlotte. Would you only include Uptown Charlotte or also listings in Plaza or Midwood or South End? That's a really good question. So the radius that you should consider very much depends on your market, right? So we're just looking at an urban market, right? There's a lot of vacation rentals in there. A lot of people maybe tend to travel for work or for concerts or various other things. But say we look out in like rural Michigan and we're looking at cabins. The radius there is going to expand because it's a lot less densely populated. The area is just much more rural, correct? So it really depends on your market, right? You mentioned in your example a couple of sort of sub-markets within Charlotte, for example. In this one in particular, when I set it up, I believe I put it right by the convention center. So you can kind of zoom out and you'll see that there are, if I zoom here, you can see all the different sort of sub-markets within Charlotte here. Now, by default, I believe that our like maximum radius I will pull in from, I believe it's 20 kilometers. Sometimes we'll go up to 50 if it's a really, really rural area. But in most cases, we're able to get up to 300 or up to 350 within a pretty small area. So if I go back here and I select here, you can kind of see that there are some listings like in this Belmont area, some listings in this Elizabeth area. But if I wanted to and like exclude the Belmont, I would just use this lasso tool and say, I actually just want these sort of more downtown listings. And again, this is you telling us just a little bit more about your own experience in your market. Do you think that, and this doesn't mean that we're not necessarily going to use Belmont listings in your final comp set, because it's important for us to really understand the nuances in your market so we cast a wider net. But when you're choosing what your foundational price at base price is, it's okay to be a little bit more specific because we want to make sure that we're pricing you sort of in the right area for your specific listing. And you're also in the Charlotte market. Very cool. You're just up the road from me. Does PriceLabs give you the ability to research base prices slash potential monthly earnings if you do not have a listing to synchronize with the platform? Yeah, that's a good question. So um, this is actually, so this webinar is fully about dynamic pricing. So if you don't have a listing yet, you might not get too much out of this. Of course, you're, maybe doing some pre-homework, but our market research tools are a really, really good option for you if you don't have a listing yet. Market dashboards is going to give you a really good deep dive into pretty much all of the market data that we have for any given area. And then Revenue Estimator Pro, you can put in any address and create comp sets. I kind of show you that if we have a little bit of time at the end. And it'll tell you basically what your monthly revenue might be, what your ADRs and your occupancy based on historic data, what we think certain listings in the market would do. So if you don't have a listing yet, this might not be the perfect webinar for you, but we're still happy to have you here. And feel free to keep asking questions, y'all. Okay, beautiful. Looks like typing an answer to that. Beautiful. Any questions about our base price yet? No? Okay. We can always come back to this, and we'll actually talk a little bit about choosing your base price when we get into learning about data as well. So the next thing that we want to talk about is setting your minimum price, right? So we set that base price, and again, that's like the foundation. But the next thing that we want to talk about is that minimum price, and your minimum price is the lowest price that PriceLabs can send out. So essentially, you're setting a floor that we can never go below. A lot of times people price their minimum a little bit too high because they don't want PriceLabs to price at their minimum price far out. We have a lot of things that are built in, the little safety nets, so that your prices far out aren't hitting your minimum. If your prices really far in advance are hitting your minimum, it's probably indicating that your prices are actually or your minimum price is actually too high, right? But I'll show you a couple of things. If you're worried about it, we can give you a little bit of a tip there. Now, you don't want your base price and your minimum price to be too close together. This means that your prices don't really have any room to move. Now, when you're thinking about your prices against your competition, you want your prices to sometimes be higher in the market and sometimes be lower in the market. During times of low demand, you want to maximize for occupancy. During times of high demand, we want to maximize for ADR, for revenue. So by making your minimum price too close to that base price, we can go really high during those high demand times, but then we get stuck. And you might have a calendar that looks like this, where your minimum price is $500, maybe $500 a night, and every single night is sitting at $500, and you're still not getting booked. Now, of course, I always like to mention this, even though we are PriceLabs and we always focus on pricing, revenue management is more holistic than that. Just because, if you're not getting booked and your prices are very low, there are other things that you will want to explore, but making sure that your pricing is fine-tuned is a very important step. So let's hop back into our dashboard here. Perfect. So somebody asked, great question. What should be the spread between your base price and your minimum price? Now, I typically like to say there needs to be at least a 20% difference. So if my base price is, we'll say, like 100, my minimum price should at least be like 80, if not lower than that. But we can also use market data, and I'll show you that in a second, how to actually suggest a better minimum for you based on what's going on in the market. And then we've got another question from Ron, no rush. I have seasonal fluctuations, summer base price, different than winter base price. Can base prices vary for two different windows and two minimum prices? Okay, so seasonal pricing. Yeah. Well, you can definitely talk about that. I will just answer those live so I know that we are talking about them now. Cool. So, okay, so to get back to this, and then we'll talk about seasonal and some other more advanced minimum pricing strategies. You want to have at least a 20% difference, ideally more than that, because again, we want to be able to optimize for occupancy during those low demand periods. Just going to click save and refresh so we have that set up here. Now, once this loads, beautiful. So we've got 80, we've got 100. Now, there's a trick that I like to use using our far out minimum. Now, what is a far out minimum? So if I go to customizations, click edit, I'm going to go to more customizations, and then I'm going to go to seasonal and minimum prices. Now we have a couple of really cool settings here that I'd like to sort of point your attention to. Now, if you feel like you are constantly, this is okay. I'm going to make this as an example. We'll say my minimum price is actually 95. So if my minimum price is 95 and my base price is 100, you'll notice that I'm seeing a lot of these 95 days on my calendar. And that's not really ideal, right? Basically, too many of my dates are hitting my minimum price, indicating to me that my minimum price is too high. Now, I might know in the back of my head, 95, I just don't want to rent for that really far in advance or during my high season, but I'm okay with 70 or 80 during my low season. So maybe I'm actually going in, and I've seen a lot of users that do this. They come in and they manually change their minimum price last minute. Just constantly go in and they say, actually, for these dates, I'm okay with 70. Actually, for these dates, I'm okay with 80. And what that does is it just creates a lot of manual effort for you. So we have a better solution. So if this is something that you're doing, this is a little tip that I'll give you. Set your lowest minimum price under configure prices. So if in the back of my head, I know that, I'd rather not, but last minute, if I'm not booked, I'm okay with going down to 70. I'm going to set 70 here, and that's going to be my lowest minimum. Now, if I also know, well, outside of 60 days, I don't want to go down to 70. I only want to wait or have that for last minute. I'm going to use what we call a far out minimum price. We're going to go to more customizations, seasonal minimum prices, and we have this option right down here. Now, what I do not recommend you doing is coming in here and not changing your minimum price under configure prices and then just raising your minimum for dates that are far out, because that can also backfire and cause your minimum price far in advance to be too high. So I would only do this in the way that I'm describing, where you're making an exception last minute here, but holding your minimum just a little bit higher. Hopefully that makes sense. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this on. You've got a couple of options. I can do a fixed number. So if I was saying, actually, my minimum is 90 outside of 60 days. Essentially what this will do is it's saying, if you're booking 60 plus days in advance, I have a different minimum in mind than I do last minute. So if you're unsure about dropping that minimum for your entire calendar, this is a nice little stopgap that you can put in. Now you have a couple of options here. You can do your fixed price. You can do percent change on base price and percent change on minimum price. I'm going to tell you right now, just don't touch percent change on base price. There are some edge cases where it works phenomenally, but 90% of the time when I see this used, it's being used wrong and it's being used by accident. So either choose a fixed price, especially if you're not using our seasonal minimums, and I'll talk about that in 1 second, or do percent change on min price, just because it's easy to calculate. If I want to raise my minimum price by 20%, I would just say, let's raise that. So then my minimum will now be 70 plus 14, 84 outside of 60 days. But do not use percent change on base price. You do also have this option for minimum weekend price. Again, I just see this being used wrong. I think that it's over customizing, right? By default, PriceLabs is going to raise your prices on the weekends for high demand dates. And for that matter, we're actually also raising your prices far out. Just by default, part of our algorithm is to raise your prices further out in your calendar. So we shouldn't be hitting your minimum on the weekends. We shouldn't be hitting your prices far out. These are little safeties that we put in, but if you employ these without using data or without really thinking about it, you might end up restricting your pricing too much. So I would say less is more in many cases with PriceLabs. Now, somebody did ask about seasons, and I will talk a little bit more about this when we do minimum or when we talk about minimum stays. You can also set your minimum prices by season if you want to. And this is a really great option for those of you who are operating in seasonal markets, like where I am in Charleston. My bottom line in my head is probably going to be different in January than it is in July. But just again, keep in mind, don't restrict yourself too much because a lot of the times, like if you just feel like something, it you might just be restricting your pricing. I'll show you how to use data if you do want to set minimum prices by season in just 1 second. I see another Q&A. Let me just double check this. Okay, so Tiffany's asking about midterm rentals, and we had a lot of people asking about that in like the registration. We had a decent number of people asking about midterm rentals. Now we do have some midterm strategies. You're going to do things a little bit differently than you would for a short-term rental. We do have a really great like we have blog posts and we have how to use PriceLabs for midterm rentals. We have, I think it's a help article. I'll be sure that we send those out to you after the webinar, but we'll definitely have to do a midterm webinar pretty soon. Awesome. So one last thing before we move on, I just want to show you something else that's pretty neat. So on your main page, I'm not sure all of you know this, but there are tons of metrics that you can add. So I've got my occupancy, I've got number of nights booked, I also got total revenue. And then something else that you can add is min price hitting dates. And I have this for the next 30 days. Now, if I scroll over here and yeah, so this one, for example, I can quickly sort my listings to see which of them have the most dates that are hitting my minimum price. Now, if I'm seeing a really high number here, a really high percentage, that might be telling me that I need to actually go in and lower that minimum. Something else that will give you a little nudge. So here I have a base price recommendation. We do also do minimum price recommendations. If PriceLabs sees that your minimum price has been pretty stagnant and we're hitting that minimum and you're just not getting any bookings, then we are actually going to tell you, hey, maybe you should lower this price, and you'll be able to accept that right here. I see a couple of chats, just want to check those. Beautiful. Oh, can you show how to find that again? Shannon, if you want to tell me what you would like me to show you again, I would be more than happy to go back there. I have a feeling that it was maybe the minimum price. Um, the minimum price far out. So if it's not minimum price far out, just let me know and I can re-show whatever I was talking about. But to get to your far out minimum, you click edit on your customizations. You go to more customizations and you'll see seasonal minimum prices. So that's this last option here. We also talked a little bit about your seasonal minimum prices as well. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, Q&A. Okay, 4-night minimum, Saturday check-ins. Okay. Okay, Marcus, great question. We are about to talk about minimum stay actually. So let me close out of this and I'll sort of talk about minimum stay and then I'll get to your question, okay? Beautiful. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about your minimum stay restrictions. So these settings, as it says right here, should be in line with the market, right? And we give you market recommendations because of this reason, right? If you are asking for a 7-night minimum stay, but everybody in your market only wants to stay for 2 nights, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. And the opposite is true as well. If you have a 2-night minimum stay or a 1-night minimum stay, you're probably going to get a lot of 1 and 2-night bookings, and you'll maybe think that you're doing, okay. But wouldn't it be better that if there are 7-night stays happening in your market, that you can be aligned with that you can say, actually, I know because PriceLabs knows that people are booking 7 nights really far in advance. And I'm going to say no to your 1 and 2 night requests because I know I can probably get a 7 night stay out of this. It's going to help you increase your revenue. It's going to help you fill your calendar more efficiently. We call this a cascading minimum stay. So basically, have a minimum stay higher far out and then decreasing it as the dates get closer. But we don't want to just set, again, our minimum stays willy-nilly. We want to do it with data. And that's what our PriceLabs minimum stay recommendation engine can do. It's a great tool. It's a bit of a mouthful. So let's hop on in and take a look at that. Now, Charlotte is a good example, but I think I would like to look at, let's look at something a little bit different here. This one, I believe, is in North Carolina. We'll look at the one in Folly Beach. Cool. So when I want to choose my minimum stay, I'm going to click Edit on my customizations. Yours might be off right now, but we're going to turn it on. And you're going to use this little Setting Suggestions button. So I'm going to click that. You have two options: prefer short term, prefer midterm. Now, short term essentially is less than 14 nights. So if you prefer to book or have stays that are less than 14 nights, then choose short term. If you prefer maybe longer stays, more than 14 nights, then you'd want to click midterm. Now, not every market is a midterm market. There aren't always a ton of people that have that demand. So sometimes midterm, if you think that the short-term recommendations are too short for you, you can use the midterm instead. But generally speaking, everybody here, except for the person that asked about midterm rentals, should use the short-term option. Beautiful. So now we're going to take a look at these recommendations. Now you can always click this button here. It'll bring you to our help article about how we get our minimum stay suggestions. But generally speaking, we are looking at historic market data over the past year, and we're saying, okay, how far in advance did people book their vacations? And how long did they stay for, right? So using that data, we're then looking at, your calendar. We're looking at how the seasons change, and we're coming up with a recommendation. So in this case, in this market, and it's different for every market, and it's also different for different size homes in each market, you'll see that we're recommending a 4-night minimum stay normally. So that's our default or just our regular minimum stay. We're then going to make some exceptions to that rule. We're going to make exceptions for gaps. We're going to make exceptions for last minute stays, so being a little bit more flexible as it gets to be, last minute. And then we're also going to kind of change it up and actually raise our minimum stay for dates that are really far out. So this is saying outside of 90 days, so 3 months from now, I'm actually raising it from a 4-night to a 6-night. And then outside of 180 nights, we're raising it to a 6-night if you check in on a weekday and a 7-night if you check in on a weekend. Our data is showing that the market can actually support this. Now, I do like to have just a little caveat here. Now, if you are new to PriceLabs, if you are new to a market, sometimes you want to be a little bit more flexible with your policies, especially if you are having poor performance. I would not necessarily recommend raising your minimum stay, say you have like a 2-night minimum stay. I wouldn't raise it to like a 4 or a 7-night minimum stay short term if you don't have anything on your books and you're struggling with occupancy. At that point, you might want to be more flexible because you want to get more occupied, and raising your minimum stay might make that a little bit harder for you. We have a great little series on things to do when your market's not performing well, and that's one of our tips there. Now, generally, so if things are going well and you are just looking to take your strategies to the next level, you're looking to optimize and improve your revenue a little bit, this is a really good strategy for you. Now you'll notice, so this is a seasonal market. This is in North Carolina, and things are different in our high season than in our low season. January, February, November, and December is definitely a slower time of year. We're probably not going to be able to get that 6 or 7-night stays, maybe on like a holiday or something, but generally speaking, for this sort of window here, we're not going to be able to have the same expectations. So you'll see here, if I hover over it, it's going to give me a new recommendation. Now it's going to look a little bit funny, and you might even see this in your market. So we're showing you basically the same windows that you would see here, but we're repeating the numbers that we're recommending. So there are different windows that kind of we're picking up in your market, but we're not necessarily recommending changing your strategy for those windows. Maybe in the future, though. Now, you can hover over these. I personally like to take screenshots because there isn't currently a way for you to sort of export this into your seasonal profile. You need to build out your minimum stay profiles and then assign them seasonally. Now, if you're unsure how to do that, our 201 webinar, our advanced onboarding that happens on Thursdays, goes in depth into how to build out minimum stay profiles and how to assign them seasonally. I can show you quickly if we have a little bit of time at the end. Just let me know in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll remember to pick that up if you're interested in it. Now, there was a question that I was holding off on Marcus. Okay, Marcus has 4-day minimums set on summer weekends. Lately, he's been getting Saturday check-ins instead of Thursday or Friday, which has left me with a couple of orphan Fridays. Is there a way in PriceLabs where I can restrict Saturday check-ins and check-outs during my high season? Marcus, that's a really great question. And the answer is maybe. So there are some things in PriceLabs that depend on the account that we're connected with. So I use the term PMS, Property Management System, a lot, but you might be directly connected to Airbnb and Vrbo. Now, depending on what we're able to control through our connection, depends on that account that we're connected with. So yes, we can control check-in and check-out restrictions. If we can, actually, the PMS that my demo account is connected to not allow us to control it. You can do it within the PMS itself. But if I did have that control, and this is a good way for you to check, you'll see here on the stay restrictions page, you'll have minimum stay settings, and then you'll also have check-in, check-out settings. And essentially, you can control check-in, check-out based on what you want. So some people, maybe their cleaners can't clean on Sundays, and you can say you can check in and check out every day except for Sundays. You can also do this seasonally. We do have something cool coming up that will make this much easier, but right now you're going to do your check-in, check-out via a date-specific override. So maybe for July through August, I want to have a a Saturday check-in, check-out. That way I can have a 7-night minimum. That's very common in beach markets, you'll see sometimes. I'll click add, and then again, under the stay restrictions area, if your connected account has the ability for us to control check-in, check-out, under minimum stay, you'll see also an option to change your check-in, check-out preferences. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm sorry, the account that I have connected does not have that ability, so we have to use our imaginations a little bit. If you still have questions at the end, ping me again, and I can log into a different account that has different PMS connections. Okay, Carmen, I will answer that later when we kind of do Q&A at the end. Same thing about the midterm. Is it possible to make an exception for one-night bookings you'd like to make for concerts when your minimum stay is 2 nights? Yeah, of course. Definitely makes sense. So you can always make exceptions to your minimum stay. I just showed you how to do a date-specific override. So overrides are really great for things like concerts, for events, where your normal customizations, think of those as like automated rule sets. It's you customizing our algorithm, and it's just going to kind of run on autopilot based on the rules that you set up. Now, the rules that you set up sometimes don't account for the various exceptions that are going to happen in your market, like a concert or sometimes like a holiday, right? I might normally have a 3-night minimum all year long, but then I realize that I can get 7 nights over Christmas and New Year's. So I'm going to make an exception to that and actually raise my minimum stay. You can do the same thing and lower it. So How are we doing date specific overrides? There's two options from your calendar. You can click this view button here, or sorry, not the view button, next to the view button, the add button. Sorry, view will allow you to see the ones that you've set and edit them. But say I want to change my minimum stay from, in this case, 6 down to 2. And we're gonna do this, what am I think I'm in August. Oh, look at August. So maybe we'll say that there's a concert for these 2 nights, and I'm okay with a 1-night minimum stay. Maybe I also know that because there's a concert, I want to raise my price. So I'll go ahead and do that here. I'll say, let's raise my price by 50%. And we'll say it's Taylor Swift concert. Sorry, Zoom is like getting in my way. There's too many modules. Beautiful. So I just added that. You'll see now that I have 50% change on my recommended price. If I save and refresh, you'll see that my prices get raised and that my minimum stay drops down from 6 to 1 or 2, whichever I put. Yep, 1. So that's probably how I would handle things like concerts. Now keep in mind, like we should be picking up concerts in your market, so you probably don't need to raise your prices anymore. You'll see things like this darker blue square, there might be something going on here. Now, if you know of a concert and we don't, let us know. We've got this great little events and holidays section right here. You can view all of the events and holidays that we're picking up in the market. Some of them, we don't necessarily know what's going on. Maybe it's like the local car show or a graduation. You can always add feedback. Let our team know what's going on that day. Also, if we're getting the impact, incorrect, or you think it needs to be higher prices or lower prices, let us know because it'll go directly to our data science team. Okay. So we answered that. Time permitting, slow shoulder season. Sure, yeah, we can talk about more seasonal settings at the end. Midterm stays, I think that we definitely have to do a midterm stay webinar pretty soon. We will be at the midterm rental, I think it's the MTR Summit in San Diego next month, if any of you are going there. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that at the end if we have some time. I know we're running out of time here. And then a good question here, how many days are considered orphan days? And you define it. You actually tell us what an orphan day is. So for those of you, and there actually were a lot of questions on this in like the pre-registration, so it's good that you asked that. Thank you for reminding me. So what is an orphan gap? My calendar is empty, so I don't have any examples here. But an orphan gap is basically an unbooked day between either 2 blocks or 2 bookings. But it doesn't have to just be one day. A gap can be 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, 5 nights. If you're a midterm rental person, a gap can be like 28 nights. Maybe you have a 30-night minimum and then you have 28 nights that you can't book. That's a real bummer. So gaps, so we call them orphan gaps or orphan days. And there's a couple of things that you can do. So we automatically adjust your pricing to be a little bit lower for orphan days. So if you have gaps of 1 night or 2 nights, we're going to drop your prices by 20% automatically. You can edit that. If we go to edit customizations, I believe under smart presets, you'll see this customize orphan day prices. You can edit this if you want. So I have a group level setting here, but by default, it's going to say we discount by 20% for 1 or 2 night gaps. Now, when I say you define what gaps are, say I want to customize these prices, I define essentially what PriceLabs does for gaps of different lengths. So maybe I want to say for gaps of 1 night, it's a little bit more like operationally hard for me. I'll say, let's like drop my prices by 10%, maybe only 5% on weekends for gaps of 1 night. And then I can say for gaps of like 2 and 3 nights, I'm okay with discounting a little bit more. I'll say 30%. Oopsies, that's fixed. I should do this. We'll say 30% discount for 2 and 3 nights. And also adjust the window that this rule is going to apply within. So if I only want this to apply last minute, You can say in the next, in the last 15 days, 0 to 15, or maybe I don't want to discount last minute because it's going to stress like my housekeepers out. So I'll say in the last 2 weeks, I'm not going to offer that discount. This is only going to apply 14 nights to 999 nights. Now, so this is orphan day pricing. Now that is separate from your orphan day minimum stay rules, right? So orphan gaps right here, it's going to be the first one that you can edit. Now, when I'm setting up orphan gaps, and this is sort of how our minimum stay recommendation engine works, we'll just go ahead and do this here. So you'll see that what we suggest for orphan gaps is gap length. So essentially, we're going to fill the gap or require a guest to fill the gap completely. So if you have a 2-night minimum, a 2-night gap, it's going to be a 2-night minimum. 1-night gap, 1-night minimum, right? No flexibility there. But the formula that we essentially use is we want all dates on your calendar to be bookable, right? If you have an open date that's not bookable, that's just money that's just being left on the table. So the formula that we use is we take whatever the longest minimum is, any date far out, right? So our highest minimum for this property potentially would be 7 nights. So essentially, 7 nights will always be bookable as long as 7 nights is available. But if it's a weekend check-in beyond 180 nights, I'm going to have a 7-night minimum. If I have a 6-night gap there, that is no longer bookable unless I have this rule set up. So again, kind of going back to what the formula is, your orphan gap should be set up for whatever your lowest minimum is, in this case, 1, to 1 less than your longest minimum. And my longest minimum is 7, so the gaps that we're accounting for here are 1 and 6. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, different gaps for everybody. Okay, got that. I know we only have like 8 minutes. I was a little bit late, so I don't mind staying on to chat a little bit longer. Okay, I'm just going to try to look at just specifically the questions that kind of on topic, and then we'll go. Okay, sorry, just making sure. I will try to answer all these questions before I hop off. I want to be respectful of all of your time. I appreciate y'all taking this, Wednesday afternoon or maybe morning. I think most of you are in the US, so afternoon with me. Okay, when you do a date-specific override and leave the minimum stay blank, will it follow the minimum stay restriction settings? Yes. So if you go in and you say, hey, I want to raise my prices by 20%, or I want to raise my minimum price by a little bit, but you don't put anything for your minimum stay, it's not going to make any change. I didn't override for my cleaning fee, but I don't want to override and then say, yep, exactly. So just if you don't want to make a change, leave that part blank. That's a good question. Beautiful. So we've got a lot to cover in the last 7 minutes, but we will do our best here. So something that was super, super important, and I think a little bit of feedback here, we will maybe split this into like a 2-part series because both this week and last week we ran over quite a bit. Super important, I want to leave you with this because it really, I think, rounds out the webinar, right? We talked about base price, we talked about minimum price, but it's really important to talk about data. So you are choosing the right minimum, the right base, and making sure that just generally your prices are looking good compared to your competitors. Now, there's a really great help article that I like to let me fix about this, that I like to reference. And while this is loading, I will recommend that you guys take a look at it too. If you click on this little help and chat bubble, I think if you type in pricing, if you type in competition, yes, okay, if you type in competition, the first article that comes up is how should you price compared to your competition? Now, this is one of my favorite articles. We've had this since I started working here 3 years ago, and I constantly refer back to this. I think it's a really helpful article. It helps you sort of understand why your prices are going to fluctuate throughout the year. And I kind of mentioned it at the beginning of this webinar, right? We want your prices to change throughout the year. Sometimes your prices are going to be too high, sometimes they'll be too low, but we really want it to be kind of right in the middle there. Now, essentially, during low demand, again, very basic, during low demand, we want to optimize for occupancy. If there's 100 listings in the area and you only have 20% occupancy, or market only gets 20% occupancy, that means that only 20 out of those 100 listings are going to get a booking. You want to be one of those 20. And part of how to do that, besides having a really nice like listing and good photos and description, part of that is going to be your price. You want to be competitive during that time of year. Now, during the high season, if your occupancy in your market's going to be like 90%, where 90 out of the 100 listings in your market are going to get a booking, let's maximize for, or not occupancy, revenue. Let's raise your prices a little bit. You're more than likely going to get booked. So let's make a little bit more money off of it. Now you can sort of extrapolate from these graphs I'm about to show you that information, right? Should I be pushing the limit or should I be on the little bit more conservative side? Now, PriceLabs is doing that for you, but it's important, if you're looking for to get a little bit more out of PriceLabs, understanding the data is a very important part of revenue management. The settings, the customizations, the dynamic pricing, that's only one half of it, but understanding the context in which your performance is happening in is so, so key. So if you haven't checked out this page yet, this is our neighborhood data page. Now, this is unique to every single one of your listings because we're showing you the comp set that we're basically pricing you off of, or the data that we're using to run our algorithm on. Very important to know, PriceLabs is not price matching you to the market, right? If the market is saying, if everybody in the market is pricing at $100, we're not going to say you should also be at $100. A lot of people aren't using data to price their listings, more so nowadays than it used to be. But still, just because everybody's doing one thing doesn't necessarily mean that based on market signals, you should also be doing that thing. So what we're seeing here is our future pricing graph. Now the black line is going to be your prices. So the most recent calculated price by PriceLabs. If you just connected your account, you'll also see a gray dotted line. That's the prices that we are pulling in from your PMS. And then we're also showing you a little bit of market data. So in this case, I have a 3-bedroom. Our comp set is going to be of about 350. You can see your comp set here. We have 350 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms in this area. You want to know where those listings are, you can show this competitor map right here. Yeah, so this is Folly Beach. This is right where I'm kind of from. So you can see exactly where all the listings that we're picking up are. And all of those listings are, 1, informing the data that you see here, and then 2, informing our algorithm. Now, this first graph, again, we're not price matching you. So this is more for your understanding of the market, your understanding of where your listing sits compared to your competitors. Now, I do have, I'm going to clear that. That's fine. It's a really small change. Sorry, I sometimes have crazy settings on my demo account and it messes things up, makes pricing look a little bit off. But we'll just let that ride for now. So with this base price of $560, so when I come in here, I'm actually looking at a couple of different things, right? I'm looking at where that black line sits relative to the pinks and grays. The black line is my pricing, the pinks and grays are the market pricing. Now, if I hide my current price, we're just left with the market. So your gray area here is the market's 25th to 50th percentile. So again, think of, we're lining up all the listings in the market one by one by their price. 25 is number 25 in line, sort of on the lower end. Then we've got your 50th percentile where the pink and the gray meet, and then the 75th percentile where the light pink and the dark pink meet, and then 90th percentile. So like the highest prices in the market are where the light pink meets the white at the top. Now, what I like to do, and something I would maybe recommend you all do, is hide the 75th to 90th percentile, especially unless you are a super luxury, really high-end listing. you don't necessarily need to be in the pinks and grays. And I think having um, the three lines there kind of make it a little bit confusing and sometimes make it seem like it's okay to be priced higher in the market than you should be. So I'm going to overlay my final price again. Now, say on any given day, these listings are going to be, throughout the year, 50, 60, 70% occupied. Where my line is in the white area, it means that I'm potentially overpriced. If I'm just a middle of the road listing, there's not going to be more than 60% occupancy. That means that there's going to be, again, we're using the 100 listings in the market example, 40 listings aren't going to get booked. Should my prices be this much higher than the other listings in my market? Potentially not, right? It's okay to maximize revenue when demand is high, but other times of years we want to be a little bit more competitive. So to me, ideally, your pricing should, especially last minute, should maybe hover a little bit more kind of in the dark pink and the grays, or even below the gray, right? In that white area below. You don't want to go too low, but a little bit below that. And then during your high demand, it's okay to be up in this dark pink and maybe even peek a little bit into the whites. But you don't want to be too high, especially if you're not getting bookings with your current pricing strategy. You want to be a little bit careful with pricing too high. Now, how do we remedy this? Looking at this, my prices are a little bit crazy. I do have kind of some crazy settings in here, so it looks like a little bit more spiky than I'd even like, spiky being a technical term. But dropping your base price a little bit, and this kind of goes back to those foundations that we're talking about, right? Dropping my base price a little bit. If I'm seeing this where my prices are just much, much, much higher in the market and I'm not getting any bookings, going from say like 560 down to like 500, or we'll say maybe like 480 in this case, just so you all can really see how this changes. Now this is going to drop my prices down. My average pricing is going to be lower because that foundation is now lower. That base price is now lower. And it loads. Perfect. So again, it's still a little bit higher than I probably would recommend. Like if this was my listing, the dummy listing, and it's got some crazy settings on there. But you'll see now there's an additional line that kind of wasn't there before. It was, but it was just sort of hidden. So now we have this dotted line, and that's where my prices currently sit in my PMS. And I can see, okay, well, I dropped my base price to 480. This is the difference that made, which I think is really useful. I'm a very visual person, so seeing that my prices used to be at 1040 or 1224, and now they're at 1049, it's very helpful to me. Hopefully it's helpful to you too. So I'm going to bring back in the market 25th and to 50th, 50th to 70th. You'll still see that my prices are a little bit high in the summer, but maybe this is like a high-end listing. It's okay for me to do that. I'm going to take a look at this occupancy chart to really understand if I can really push the limits as much as I am here. Now, looking at this, we've got this red line here, and that's the forward-looking occupancy in the market. Looking at those 350 listings on any given day, what percentage of them are booked? Now I'm also going to add last year data, and this is going to make the graph a little bit, not messier, but a little bit more, give it a couple more lines, but I'll hide this one. So now you'll see two, a gray line and a red line. Red line is future looking, gray line is this time last year. So as of April 17th, 2023, what did the forward-looking occupancy in the market look like? In this market, there are definitely some weekends where last year was stronger. Friday, May 3rd, for example. Last year it was booked at 71%, whereas this year it's only booked at 56%. Saturday, May 25th, we know that that is a holiday, and it's actually right on, or it's pretty much right on par. It says that it's doing worse, but it's 60.6% occupied this year. Last year at this time it was 66.8%, so pretty much right the same. So you can basically look at this, and our algorithm is actually using these two lines. We're looking at 2 years of historical data, 1 year of forward-looking data, and predicting what that final occupancy is going to be. So you can see here now, if I add market occupancy last year final, this is essentially telling us for, say, July 9th last year, the market ended at 79.9% occupancy. If all goes well, if all performs the same as it did last year, you can kind of think of that as like the potential in the market. Now, when you're looking at this chart, okay, remember, going back, we're going to pretend that there's only 100 listings in this market. If 79 of those 100 are going to get booked, it's probably okay for me to be priced a little bit higher, right? I still want to be one of the ones that gets booked, but this is a little bit further out, right? We still have 3 or so months until mid-July. We are seeing that currently July is pretty much performing okay. It's a little bit lower. Some days are a little bit higher. So looking at the two, the solid red and the solid gray. And I know that this is probably going to end up to be probably around 80% occupied when it's all said and done. So right now I'm okay with my prices being a little bit higher. So this is how I would use these pages and use that to inform things like your base price. Use this to inform things like your minimum price, right? In the fall, if we were coming into this market, you might see that my minimum price is being hit by a lot of dates. And something that I like to do is take a look maybe at the next 1 year and take a look at the lowest prices in the market. So you can kind of see how like the bottom of the gray kind of fluctuates throughout the year, but it seems like January is maybe the lowest time. So I might put in this market, you'll see I'm just kind of hovering across this graph here, and I'm seeing like 240, 220, like 220 is probably like the lowest that I'm seeing for the 75th, the 25th percentile. So one thing to keep in mind is like you don't need to drop your prices too low. We want to give ourselves enough room to, get lower when needed. But if you're priced at $50 and everybody else's lowest price is $100, you might be leaving a little bit of money on the table there. Maybe you could get away with pricing at $85 and you're still the most competitive in the market. So that's when I say, you want to use data when you're choosing your minimum price. Take a look at that market price too. So in this case, I will put like say 200 because I saw in the market goes as low as like 225, but I still want to be competitive. So 200 in this case will be my minimum. Now I'll click save and refresh, and some of my prices. Actually, I don't think any of this will change because I'm actually raising my minimum, so I'm not even going to sync. Now this is really good because this is sort of like broad data. You're understanding the nuances of the market. But of course, if you have some listings that you like to keep an eye on that are your direct competitors, try and find them on this map, right? You can see maybe 818 East Arctic. Maybe that's a really good competitor. Yeah, they've got nice curtains and stuff. I can say that this is a direct competitor. And I want to pay attention to their prices against mine. So we'll say 818 East Arctic Classic Cottage. Let's update this. And now we're going to see my listings prices and occupancy against the listing that I have selected here. So you'll be able to see if any dates are grayed out like this, that means that it's booked or blocked. You can see what your prices are compared to theirs. Now you can also see this in a graph form as well. So again, use that same principle, right? Maybe it's okay to be a little bit higher than your competition during high demand times. Maybe it's better to be a little bit lower during low demand times. Again, it's completely up to you. It's your strategy, but I just wanted to walk you through these graphs so that you really feel like you are understanding them and can use them going forward. Now we are already 8 minutes past. We started this a little bit late, so totally fine with sticking around for a little while. Beautiful. So we've got a ton of questions. I've got 13 open questions here. We might not have time to answer all of them, unfortunately, but I will do my best in the little bit of time that we have left. So let's start from the top. Carmen, where do you get the setting for demand factor sensitivity? I have one listing where it jumps 100 to 150% increase. That's a good question, Carmen. So what is demand factor? Let's start by answering that. So we talked about the foundation of our pricing, and that is our base price. But what happens after you choose your base price? We apply various factors and customizations, and that is where we get that final price. So if you hover over any date and Karma is actually seeing that there is a demand factor where it's 100 to 150% increase. She's probably seeing that through this little tooltip that we give you. Now, there's something called the Monster Jam in this market, which I think is really funny. If there's any sort of events that are happening, you'll see that right at the top of the tooltip. See where it says Monster Jam in this case. Now, you'll then see your base price for the listing, in this case, 480, and then the market factors are going to apply on top of that. You've got seasonality plus 5%, demand factor plus 33%. You can think of your seasonality as how your prices change throughout the year, month to month. Is July more in demand than August? Is August more in demand than September? How does that sort of ebb and flow throughout the year? Now, the demand factor, that's a little bit different. That's actually the day-to-day fluctuation. So is it a Monday or is it a Saturday? Is it Monster Jam or is it just a regular Tuesday in April? The demand factor is going to basically raise your prices or lower your prices based on that sort of fluctuation from today to tomorrow. Now, if you're seeing that your prices are, or you're seeing that demand factor jumping up 100 to 150%, I would almost guarantee, I will pretty much guarantee that there's some sort of an event or a holiday that's doing that. Now, if you do not feel like we are understanding that correctly, go ahead and give us some feedback. Go to your events and holidays, and you can click view. And for whatever date you're seeing that huge increase, it'll show up here. If we don't know what the event is, it'll just be blank, but we'll show you what your average price is that day or over that time. You can also see if you have any date-specific overrides that you've set for that. Now, if you're saying, hey, that 100% increase, that is way too much, go ahead and add feedback. Let us know that the prices are too high for those dates. Now, we might not necessarily change that, but we will take that into account. Again, it goes directly to our data science team. You can always go in here and say, hey, demand factor is too high. Let me actually put in a maximum price, or let me adjust my prices down a little bit. I want to drop my prices by 20% for these dates. So that's another way that I would maybe counteract if you're seeing your demand factor higher than you would like it to be. Either drop your prices or say, actually, my maximum price for this date is, we'll say $600. Now, the question that Carmen asked was, how do you change your demand factor settings? If you click edit on your customizations, go to more customizations and go to advanced, yes, advanced, you will see demand factor sensitivity. By default, it's going to be off, just like all of our customizations. Just because the toggle's off doesn't mean nothing's happening. It just means that you haven't customized it. I'm going to turn it on and I'm going to say, okay, maybe I don't want recommended. Maybe I want to have low sensitivity. So this essentially means if we're detecting demand fluctuations in your market, whether that's high demand or low demand, we're going to be less sensitive to them. So you'll probably see, if you're looking back on that future pricing chart, you'll see really low dips and really high dips. If you set this to low, all right, set this to low, it's going to bring those spikes, both the ones going down and the ones going up, a little bit closer to center. It's totally fine to do. I personally don't always recommend it just because, especially if you're just looking at one weekend, it might make other dates, either underpriced or overpriced, depending on the sensitivity. So I personally recommend leaving that at recommended, but feel free to change that to low if you want. The other option is aggressive, which I typically, or sorry, not aggressive, high. We recently changed the name. And that's going to do the opposite. It's going to make your pricing, again, technical term, much more spiky, much higher highs, much lower lows. Okay, hybrid model. I don't think that I'm going to have time to talk about some of the hybrid, it's not the hybrid questions, the midterm questions, just because we're running over. I do appreciate all of y'all. I see 20 plus of you are still online with us, which is really incredible. Well, we're going to have to do a midterm webinar pretty soon. So that's definitely one piece of information that I've gotten out of this. Let's see what else we have here. Marcus, from your experience, is there an advantage in blocking dates more than 2 months out, or would you recommending opening, say, 6 months and using minimum stay recommendations as you recommended or as you demonstrated? Marcus, 100%. I mean, my question for you would be, why aren't you opening your calendar 6 months out? Um, Now I could see maybe not wanting to open up your calendar 2 years out just because you don't know what's going to happen. But we have plenty of data within the next year to price you accurately. If your concern is, hey, like Taylor Swift hasn't announced her next tour yet, we do monitor those things, right? You obviously don't want to be the first person in the market to book, but if you actually have your calendar blocked for a lot of the year, it's going to really affect your performance on the OTAs, on Airbnb, on Vrbo. They a part of their like SEO is actually looking for properties that have the most availability. And by blocking large portions of your calendar, you're going to end up showing up much further down in the search results. Also, think about, how obviously it depends on your market and it depends on the type of listing you have. But a lot of times people plan things far in advance, right? You might at least start looking or dreaming about your vacation 6 months in advance. Maybe you don't book until last minute, but maybe 6 months out, you see a house that you really like and you start thinking about your vacation. And then in a couple months, you go back and book that house if it's still available. So you're not showing up in search results. You're blocking your calendar and you're making basically your chances on the OTAs worse because of that. Now, if you're worried about pricing, if you're worried about your minimum stay, we have the tools for that. We've raised your prices by default far out. It's based on the market, it's based on your listing size, but I would say on average, like we're going to raise your prices a year out by at least 20% higher than they were, or they would be this year. So, with that in mind, I would definitely unblock your calendar as long as it makes sense. If you're doing like arbitrage or something and like your lease ends, you don't want to be renting, a home that you don't have rights to. But for legally, what you can do, I would keep your calendar unblocked. Okay. Okay, so Toby, if you have an API example owner is, so if you have a PMS, if you have a property management system, is there any reason to use a child listing in PriceLabs? Yeah, so there are two reasons why you'd use child listings. One, Toby, like you said, if you don't use a PMS like OwnerRez, then you would connect both your Airbnb and your Vrbo accounts and telling us that, say, your Vrbo listing is a child listing to the Airbnb listing, it's going to save you time and it's going to save you money. Now, there are other reasons why you'd use a child listing. This is something that you need to ask us to enable. But if you have a multi-unit where you have a bunch of apartments that you want to price exactly the same, maybe operate more like a hotel, then you can tell us that, unit A, B, C, D, and E are all child units of unit F because they're all exactly the same. And I want my prices and my strategies to be the same. So there are two reasons why you'd use a child unit or child listing. Let's see. When I see total occupancy listed on the pricing dashboard for the next 736 or 730 days, if I block off inhospitable, it seems like it tells PriceLabs that the day is booked and therefore affects pricing or increases it. Is this true? That's a really good question. So most PMSs, most connections that we have do tell us whether or not a date is booked or a date is blocked. Now, for these listing metrics here, this is total occupancy. So it's telling you regardless of a booking or a block, you'd want to look at adjusted occupancy to see just bookings. Now, the listing metrics have no effect on your price. They're just metrics, they're just there. There is one thing that will have an effect on your price, and that is our occupancy-based adjustments. Our occupancy-based adjustments basically look at your listing's occupancy over various day ranges, next 30 days, the next 60 days. And if your PMS doesn't tell us what's a block and what's a booking, then that does have the potential of raising your prices or not lowering them as much. Not necessarily raising them as much, but typically just not lowering them as much as you would want. Now there's a couple of options here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if you go into more customizations, we're going to go to general. In my case, the second to last option, but it might be last option for you all, is going to be your occupancy-based adjustments. If you click edit here, it's going to give you this little matrix. Essentially what's happening is we're looking at the different occupancy percentage for this listing over these date ranges, like I said before. So 0 to 15 days, if I don't have anything on the books less than 10% occupancy, we are going to drop prices by 15%. Now, if I want to do something different, if I know that maybe I'm not getting my bookings picked up because of my PMS, you could do something like this super aggressive discounting, where we're only discounting and we're just a little bit more sensitive to it, right? This is completely adjustable. So if you don't want to go down this far, you can edit this. It's also going to pay attention to that minimum price that you've set. So it will never go below your minimum. But this is honestly a really great setting, especially if your listings are underperforming, just not getting bookings, because it's reactive to your performance. But I will double check on hospitable for you and we'll reach out to you after that, okay? So I'll say answer live. Okay. How does PriceLabs see the prices of book dates for other listings? Good question. So we don't necessarily see the booked prices for other listings. We can see what the prices were before the dates booked or got blocked. So if you're looking at that compare competitor calendar that we were looking at before, you can see what the prices were listed before the booking or block came in. Okay. How did you get the holiday event line? If you just hover over a date, it'll show you if we're picking up a holiday. It's all the way at the top of this little tooltip. If you are looking to get feedback, on the right-hand side of the calendar, you'll see events, holidays. You can view or report events here. And I appreciate y'all sticking with me. There's still, I can't believe there's still 20 of you. Very cool. Feel like I have to answer everybody's questions and y'all are sticking around. This is being recorded, so if you do have to leave, feel free to hop off. We will send you a copy of this later. Okay. Okay, good question. So Shannon is asking about sort of like how discounts stack. So if you have a 20% discount within 10 days and then an orphan percent discount of 10%, is it going to combine the discount? This is one of the more confusing things. It won't combine them. So there are 3 discounts that interact or that go by these rules. There's your orphan day, your last minute, and your adjacent. And adjacent's kind of advanced, so we don't really talk about it much, but those 3 interact with each other in sort of a unique way. If you have an orphan day discount, a last minute discount, and or an adjacent discount, we're going to take the lowest discount. Meaning, so if I have a 20%, in your example is a 20% discount last minute and a 10% discount orphan, we're not going to pay attention to the orphan. We're just going to do the last minute of the 20% because we don't want your prices to go too low when they're stacking. Now, if you have a 20% discount for last minute, but then you raise prices for orphan, so I have a 10% increase for my orphan days, those are going to stack. They will sort of cancel each other out. Same thing if you increase. I believe if you are increasing your prices, I think it works the same as if you're decreasing, essentially saying, hey, we're going to take the highest and do that. But we can double check, I think. Let's take a look at our help article. Y'all are testing me today, which is great. Last minute prices. Let's see if this has this customized gradual fixed level. Okay, this one I might have to get back to y'all on because I am not quite sure if you have increases. Typically, people don't increase their prices last minute and increase for Orphan Day, so I'm not quite sure how that would work, but we can definitely double check and get back to you. Thanks for that question. Okay, and awesome. So I picked very close competitors with large mansions, few indoor pools. Are my prices okay? So two things here, Reinhard. So he picked close competitors with large mansions, a few indoor pools. So if you are looking at your compare competitor calendar, something very important, your prices are not impacted by the listings that you choose there. It's purely for your own understanding of your prices. This way you can go in and it can help you make decisions when you're fine tuning your strategy. So whether those are your customizations or those date specific overrides that you're doing, what I want or what I hope you all get out of this webinar is that you shouldn't just be going in and sort of setting up customization, setting your base price, just picking it out of nowhere, right? Just setting something and because you feel like it. We try to give you the data through that neighborhood data section so that you can make informed decisions, so that you can understand where your pricing sits or understand the occupancy performance in your market, and then take that into your strategies. So what you're seeing in neighborhood data, the full comp set is what's powering your pricing, but if you just choose a couple of listings, then that's not necessarily going, or it won't change your prices. Same thing with base price help. You can do a little lasso tool for base price help. That's only going to affect that base price market recommendation. It's not going to affect your prices long term. Well, it will via your base price, but we'll be taking into account a larger comp set than the ones that you've selected there. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. If you have any others, we can definitely do our best to answer those. Yeah, so Shannon, again, to sort of rambled on there for a second. If you have a last minute discount and an orphan discount, it will not combine the discounts. It'll take the greater of the two. So in your case, last minute is 20% off. That is a greater discount than 10. So only the last minute will apply. The only time they combine is when your one is raising your price and one is lowering your price. Can your maximum price be based off of the market's 50th to 75th percentile price? That's a good question. Currently, no. It's something that we've had people request a lot recently, both maximum and minimums. We've started to explore this idea, but there's the possibility of like a feedback loop, right? So if your prices are, hitting your maximum, and then everybody else's prices are also hitting like their maximum, and we're seeing that all the prices are just getting higher and higher. It's going to make your maximum too high. With a maximum, it's not as scary as potentially just pricing yourself like off of a percentile. Like that's something that we would very much not recommend because of feedback loop potential. But it is something that has been requested quite a bit recently. So maybe in the future we'll see. Okay, we're getting down to it. I'm going to cut us off for 2 minutes out. If you all have further questions, reach out to us at support@pricelabs.co. We will be reaching out for a little bit of feedback. I know that this was a little bit longer than intended. We didn't get through quite, all the stuff that I wanted to, but hopefully, I mean, my goal for this was for you all to be able to ask questions that you have and hopefully get a little bit more um, out of what you're currently doing in PriceLabs, fine tuning a little bit, peeling back some of the customizations that you may have made, really getting back to basics and understanding so that you can move forward in a much more successful way. If you have questions at all, please reach out to us, support@pricelabs.co. Our team will work over the next few days to reach out to you if there were any questions that were not answered. We'll be emailing you directly via our support team. But as always, thank you all so much for your time. I know we went over by a half hour today, which is crazy. It's incredible all of y'all are still here. But again, thank you so, so much. And I look forward to seeing you all at future webinars. Have a good one, y'all.